is Nvidia's RTX 4080 finally selling out? And is it because of this guy? This is AMD's 7900 XTX and of course the XT. Was this just not very good? We know that AMD had a lot of hype going into this launch and people were holding off on buying GPUs. Nobody wanted to buy something like a 4080, which is not a good value at $1,200 MSRP. Definitely not a good value at all compared to what this was announced at. But then it seems like when this actually came out, people either didn't buy the XT version, which is the cheaper, much cheaper in fact, $899 version, and they didn't really even buy this one, even though it's sold out. This one kind of wasn't really released in very large quantities. So what's going on here? In my opinion, and yes, I do have an XTX, so I've actually tested it, and I think it's actually okay. I think it's fine. Of course, it's going to have some teething issues. It's not going to be perfect. I actually just threw this guy to test. This guy had more issues. This is Intel Arc. That's an example of a much more immature type of platform. And if you like content like this, remember to smash that like button and subscribe so we can reach 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. But the thing about the RTX 4080, nobody was complaining that it was unstable or the drivers were bad. Basically, it's too expensive. That boils down the entire conversation of the 4080. If the 4080 was $899, you think that anybody would complain? Nobody. Everybody would buy it, even though it's a few $100s more than the original, the 3080 was supposed to be. So that comes down to pricing. However, the 7900 XTX and the XT, there have been some complaints on some of the performance, some of the complaints on some of the drivers. Maybe AMD released it a little bit prematurely. It makes sense if they rushed it because look, it's the end of the year. They need to get in before the holiday season. Even the CEO promised that we were going to get the next generation out. I mean, Nvidia had theirs out already, so how far can they go without releasing a competitive product? So you can see there's a lot of pressure on them to actually release it. I mean, that's part of the problem with Intel Arc. They had pressure to release the GPU because they kept promising and delaying, and eventually they did, and it was still very, very buggy. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows 10 Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. Now, this still presents a pretty good experience. Like the other day, I did a video. Watch this. I threw it in my system. As you can see, it was playing Call of Duty Modern Warfare. In fact, it got really high numbers comparable to the 4090, and I had a pretty good experience using it. It wasn't like crashing or anything. Didn't really have any issues. Performance was there. Well, likewise, let's take a look at actual facts. Even if I search now for an RTX 4080, let's try Newegg. There are two in stock sold by Newegg, but they're about $13.99, and these are sold by Newegg, so it's not like a scalper markup or third party. It's just some MSRPs, the 4080s are more expensive. Of course, nothing at $11.99, and even though Best Buy has had drops of the 4080 at $11.99, that's going to be a little bit less common. So we can say that most likely online it's difficult to get a 4080 at that MSRP, but you can find a 4080. Of course, if you go to Micro Center, if you're lucky enough to have one of those near you, I know not everybody is, they do have a lot of 4080s in stock. In fact, closer to $11.99. None exactly $11.99, but I saw even today there was like a gigabyte and a Zotac for like $12.79 or something like that. So close enough, but not everybody has that. So you can say while we can find 4080s in stock, typically it's going to be the ones that are a little bit overclocked, maybe $13.99. So that's certainly a problem, but the cheaper ones definitely do seem to be selling. Now, are the 4080s going to start to sell more because people aren't all that impressed with this guy, the 7900 XTX? That's really hard to say. One thing that I know is if you want an XT, which is not a good value compared to the XTX, much like the 4080 is not a good value compared to the 4090, you can find them easily, even on Newegg. I just searched at $8.99. You can get the reference edition or even an AI AIB one, if you want a little bit better cooling, you can find an XT easily. Anybody, you can find it across many different retailers. Newegg is just one example. That one, however, is in stock, does not seem to be selling at all. That's because the perceived value, and I made a video on this yesterday, what's better, the value proposition of a GPU or outright being the best? Price to performance is better. So even though this guy here is more expensive than the XT, the price to performance is much, much better than the XT. So people buy that up immediately. And something else too, I think they had lower numbers for like the XTX. Like on launch day at my Micro Center, they had only 20 of the XTX and 40 of the XT, which first of all, those numbers are pretty low already. The 4090s, they had 150 to 200 on launch day. So you see, it's like 1/3 basically that they had of these guys, and not as many people were going to buy them. And of course, the people that would buy them went immediately for the XTX, leaving the XTs to stay in stock longer. I mean, really, if we go by actual data, the XT, it's not a bad GPU. In some cases, it's like as good as a 3090 Ti, which was like $2,000 this year. So for $899, even though it's expensive, it would have been nice to see that at like $649, like the 6800 XT was. I do think that even though it's not a great value comparatively, it's still not bad compared to what we've seen before. But obviously, people are not really in agreement because nobody is buying it. And this is definitely pushing more people towards the 4080. Not only that, it's also pushing people towards waiting for what Nvidia has next. That's definitely a big trend that we've seen. Before an AMD launch, everybody was hyped up. They all said, oh, Nvidia overcharged us for a long time. We kind of want payback. We're going to go for AMD. And then AMD launched at the exact same price that they announced them at. In fact, I was happy to see that most of the AIB models stayed within close to the reference price. Like this guy here, which is, this limited edition, was $1099. That's only $100 more than the reference XTX at $999. That's pretty fair. I was expecting at least a $200 markup. So I'm sure AMD probably spoke with their AIB partners and kept them in check, because on the RX 6000 generation, those numbers varied wildly. Often, if 6900 XT was going to be $999, it went all the way up to $1,400, $1,500. I even saw $2,500 at some point. Granted, this was during the GPU shortage, so special conditions apply there. Now, we're not really in the GPU shortage, but the market is still very, very funny. So keeping the price closer makes sense because the demand is going to be considerably less. But anyway, they could have bumped it up a lot more. I mean, look at the variation in prices that the 4080 has, from $1,199 all the way up to $1,549 for like the Strix. So this is at least keeping it a little bit closer to the chest, even though there are a few models that will go above that, of course. But having said that, the $899 XT, definitely widely available still. People aren't buying it. That's because it's going to be about the same price of the 4070 Ti. Now, as far as we know now, the 4070 Ti, and there's been some leaked numbers that show that it actually beats the XT, for example, in some like synthetic benchmarks, and from Nvidia's data when we had seen the 4080 12GB, it maybe was something like a 3090 Ti, so you can expect it to be close to, an XT, maybe a little bit better, of course, with better ray tracing. And $899 was the price Nvidia wanted to sell the 4080 12GB. As we've seen so far, there's no evidence to prove that they're going to lower that price. I know that I would love to see it at $699, maybe $799 tops, but I'm not too sure if Nvidia is going to want to do that. We're going to see exactly what happens. They're not changing anything with the specs. It's basically that 4080 coming back. It's even been confirmed recently. Only difference is it's going to be called the 4070 Ti, and apparently that should be enough for people to stomach it, even though I think it should really have a bigger price drop than just $899. So as you can see, in a weird way, the AMD actual launch of RDNA 3 kind of is pushing people back towards Nvidia. I mean, we always kind of knew that was going to happen. The running joke was that they want AMD to price their GPUs cheaper so Nvidia can price theirs cheaper and then they can go buy Nvidia. Unfortunately, that's just how the market is right now. Nvidia is a massive dominant player, usually with over 80% market share, and it doesn't doesn't really seem like that's going to really be changing. I mean, look at the 4090. That sells like hotcakes, and it's the most expensive GPU that Nvidia or AMD make for that matter. Now, the 4070 Ti, going to be interesting. If they give it a discount, you can bet that it's going to sell pretty well. Remember, it's not likely to have a Founders Edition, which generally will stay at its base MSRP, meaning the AIB partners have a little bit free reign in order to change the prices up a little bit. That's why I think it's likely to stay at $899. If there was a Founders Edition, maybe $799 would be possible, because then still the AIB partners could release it at $899, and that would be a reasonable $100 increase over the Founders Edition. But since we're dealing with all AIB models, most likely for the 4070 Ti, that's how it was going to be for the 4080 12GB. It means that $899, especially from AIB partners, is a very likely price. If I'm AMD today and I look at the store shelves and I see that the XTX is completely sold out and the XT is still in stock, then maybe they have to do some price adjustment, especially on the XT. I don't want to say maybe it should be $799. Maybe the 7900 XT just needs a lower price point. So any compromises that it has, if people think that the drivers aren't as good as Nvidia, if people think ray tracing is not as good, if people think content creation is not as good, maybe all of these elements push it back down to $799. Or else, if it's priced the same as a 4070 Ti, even if the performance is close, I think people are just going to go towards Nvidia. Nvidia just has a much more dominant mind share and market share. And even if the performance was a little bit worse on the 4070 Ti, I think people would still buy Nvidia. So unfortunately, AMD has to be first a little bit more stable with their drivers and make sure that their products are actually completely finished, so you don't have any questions from the community that something was rushed or maybe you're paying way too much for something that's not finished yet. And then secondly, they really have to be mindful of their price to performance. It's nice that they definitely compete with some of these higher end Nvidia GPUs, but honestly, it feels a little bit unfinished. It does feel unrefined. Even when I throw this guy, the XTX, in my rig here, and then I throw in like a 4080, the 4080, it just feels better for some reason. Like even the cooler is more refined. Like this thing is noisy. It has a lot more coil whine than my GPU had, even though that can affect anything, and Nvidia does have coil whine as well. The cooler on the 4080 was just better. The driver experience was definitely a little bit better. It just feels like the XTX is not quite as refined, and you're paying a cheaper price for it, but you're also getting a slightly cheaper product than Nvidia in terms of its like driver build quality, if you want to say that. At least the good news here is that probably a lot of these issues with this AMD GPU can be fixed, because a lot of them are most likely just driver issues, and it could have a lot of performance potential as soon as they get those figured out. They have a little more time with them, and like they say, AMD GPUs age like fine wine. That's definitely been true of like the 6900 XT. You can see that it increased performance from its original launch date drivers to if you try it now. So you could definitely see this GPU getting better, but it's definitely hard to say something is great now if it still has too much potential in the future. Something like the 4090 is already great now. That's why people go and buy it. If it gets a little improvement, it's just a bonus. Something like this, you're actually actively looking for improvements. Of course, like the Intel Arc, you need improvements or else it's not going to be stable. So AMD definitely has to polish up, first of all, their timing and the quality of their drivers, so there are no questions, and then they can let the performance and the price speak for themselves. And I still think they have to be maybe a little more aggressive with the price. Like, I'd like to see the XTX, even though $999 seemed impressive, I think it should really be maybe like $949, and the XT maybe $799. I feel then they would sell a lot more and start to open up market share, and people would be more willing to put up with these little drawbacks that these GPUs have. All right, guys, so let me know what you think. Do you agree that the AMD launch didn't really go as planned, or is it pretty much what you were expecting? Would you buy a 4080 at its higher price because this didn't pan out exactly the way that some people wanted to? Let me know down below. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.